Welcome back to Building a Fighter. My name is Dr. Austin Shane, sports chiropractor in Scottsdale, Arizona. With me, as always, badass strength coach in Denver, Colorado, Alex Friedman. What up, dude?
What is good?
Beautiful Sunday morning, and we're going to be talking to you guys about common ailments that we hear from our fighters all the time, whether they're professional, amateur, recreational rollers. Typically, these 5 different areas, whether they're symptoms, pain, or just irritation, pop up on almost everybody. And we want to give you guys some tips on whether it's not necessarily how to fix it, because your boy can't give healthcare information over the internet. Don't come sue me. But we can give you guys some tips to understand what's going on and then some solutions to potentially mitigate it for the future. So, Alex, what's the first one we want to talk about?
Yeah, so essentially when we were brainstorming for this episode, it was like, Alex, what hurts all the time? I was like, this stuff. Okay, let's talk about it.
100%.
Right. But no, like chronic shit that I do feel a lot, but also my fighters just constantly bring up to me is like, my X is always tight, my sore, whatever. So our first one is my hamstrings, right? Hamstrings are always tight. Like my legs are always sore. Like, and I'm just constantly bending over to try and touch my toes or sitting in like a V sit trying to get more loose, quote unquote. So like Austin, again, what's actually happening there? And is that like maybe the best strategy or probably not? Spoiler alert.
Yeah, definitely not. So I come to a rule with hamstrings of if it doesn't work within a week of you stretching to make it feel better for more than 3 days at a time, that's not the solution. And you'll find actually quite often that the more you stretch your hamstrings, the tighter they actually end up getting. And you don't think about it because they always feel tight.
Right.
But you'll stretch them for 10 minutes at a time. You'll go, boo, forward fold, try to touch your toes, hold that for 20, 30 seconds. Oh, we do that 5 times. And then the next day you wake up and right in the morning, your fucking hamstrings, your low back's tight.
Well, and that's what you explained to me. That's like the Chinese finger trap, like analogy,
100%.
right? Is like you get your fingers in the Chinese finger trap. You keep trying to pull them apart, pull them apart, pull them apart. It just gets tighter and tighter. You're aggravating the already aggravated symptom or
Right.
system.
100%. And this is one of those simple cases of sometimes in order to fix the problem, we have to leave the symptom alone. And the symptom is tight hamstrings. Almost exclusively in MMA athletes, but especially the grappling side of MMA athletes, their constant hamstring tension is coming from irritated nerves and or disc of the lumbar spine. So when that low back, just because of the positions of grappling and just because of the positions of MMA, even if you're not a grappler, the rotatory, that high speed rotation that you can get from throwing high kicks and stuff like that as a Muay Thai fighter, that adds pressure on the disc. The more pressure we'll put it this way: our bodies weren't used to be made to be used as weapons. I don't know if you guys know that at home, but
They're made to run around.
exactly, like we have fight or flight, and we're only supposed to fight when we absolutely have to. Yet we're trying to do that over and over and over again, and that's fine because that's what we decided to do. Me and Alex, we've wrestled our whole lives. MMA fighters, jiu-jitsu athletes, all of these things are fun hobbies and or professions. But that doesn't mean our bodies were designed to do that. And because of those added stimuli, we can adapt our bodies to make them as bulletproof as possible. So we try to get rid of these symptoms, but that doesn't mean they're not going to arise just because of what we're doing to ourselves. So with these hamstrings, for example, when we know it's most likely the disc or the nerves that are irritated, that's what we need to focus on. And it's almost going to seem counterintuitive, but my first line of defense when an athlete comes to me where they have chronically tight hamstrings and it's actually starting to affect their body, whether it's pain or decreasing performance, is I'm going to put them into a prone press up. And really, this is from a thing called McKenzie method, where you're supposed to do a red light, green light, yellow light assessment in every single direction, but it comes out to about 85% of the time, prone press ups is where we want to start. So I can get rid of, I can kind of like cut the line here and give a general guideline of just starting there. And if that doesn't work, then we dive deeper into what we want to do, especially for like online training athletes and stuff like that. So a prone press up is almost like a cobra from yoga, where we're getting that extension, where we're trying to get that almost like passive extension of the low back, where the arms are doing the work to push us up into that arched position, and our low back and glutes are not doing the work. That allows our low back to start to relax. Those muscles relax as you get there because they're not firing. And the disc gets put into extension, which is, in my mind, how I believe this works is it's the opposite mechanism of what we consistently do throughout the day. We know that like everybody says like, oh, like prone press ups don't actually shove the disc or the disc material back into the spine like we originally thought. We've seen that on functional MRIs as they do it, right? But what we do believe happens is, or what I believe happens is it's the reciprocal movement desensitizes the movement. We almost exclusively throughout our day, and especially in combat sports, specifically grappling, are forward folded. We're in a flexed position of the lumbar spine, yet that's not necessarily how our bodies were made to operate. So what we're doing is we're trying to reciprocate that movement, or we're trying to do the opposite. And that should bring us back to quote unquote homeostasis. And even though we know we're not shoving disc material back into the disc, it desensitizes it and it gives the nerve a little bit of a break, because as we lean forward, that could put more pressure on the nerve in the back, which sends those signals down to the hamstring to tighten it up.
Yeah.
And that's the key point here, where if the back is always under constant threat, the nerves are going to be under threat. As soon as the nerves get under threat, specifically the nerve roots, that's going to send a signal all the way down the chain from the glute. So the tight piriformis syndrome that everybody has. It's not your fucking piriformis, I promise you.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's not. It's like 1% of the cases are actual piriformis syndrome. It's not your tight hamstrings. It's just the nerves. Number one goal is to protect themselves, right? It's to protect the body. So with that information, they're going to lock down movement as much as possible because they perceive threat. Well, with that perceived threat, how does that threat get worse? We move too much. So the nerve's going to send a signal to the hamstring, to the glutes, to the piriformis to not allow it to contract or relax in theory. And it feels tight in a spatial awareness setting to your brain. So you feel like you need to stretch to get back to homeostasis, when in reality, the problem is the low back sending faulty signals down the chain.
Yeah.
So that's why we need to focus on the low back instead of just trying to stretch it away at the hamstrings, which actually puts more pressure on the disc and actually makes it worse in the long run.
Yeah, I mean, you can deep dive into like the Chinese finger trap analogy of like we need to prone press up is like pushing into the Chinese finger trap, loosening it up a little bit. But the end goal is not to just push in as hard as you can. The goal is to create like a free flowing, functional type of movement where we can push in, pull out, push in, pull out, right? And we have a good balance of each of those. Now, I kind of have two questions branching off of that. First thing, I guess, just specifically the prone press up. And I've had this with a couple athletes. As soon as we get up from the prone press up, my lower back like feels tighter. Is that something that you've experienced?
Yep, totally normal. A lot of the times we'll call them like radicular symptoms, where they are symptoms down the chain, but the problem is in the spine. That's all that is. The symptoms will work its way back up the chain. So most of the time with my disc patients, I always tell them on the first visit, like if you say you have pain in the back of your knee and you start doing press ups, it's actually a good sign if that pain goes completely away in the knee and goes up to the hip. That's a very common thing.
Yeah.
And then eventually the pain will go from the hip all the way to the spine, and it won't be as broad, but it'll be almost like not necessarily a sharper pain, but the stimulus will work its way up the chain until it gets to the source.
Gotcha.
So what that's called is EXPOSS, extremity pain of a spinal source. And it wants to always work its way back up to the spine. When we do these prone press ups, or also what I want to talk about, like nerve glides or nerve slides, stuff like that, that allows that focal point or that knee to start loosening up, but the symptoms will work its way back. And as we do prone press ups, even though you're trying to not use your back, your brain doesn't know how not to at first, right? It's if you go into that cobra position, you're going to feel like you have to arch your back to get there, because again, body's number one rule is to protect itself. Well, what's your mechanism of stabilizing that area? A lot of people, if they don't know how to breathe, which almost everybody I start working with doesn't actually know how to breathe efficiently.
How to breathe?
They start to arch and like squeeze their back to get it up, because that's how they feel is the most efficient way in their head to stabilize that movement. That's why your back feels tight when you're doing prone press ups. It's because as you're going through the movement, you don't know how to stabilize your spine on the way up. You don't know how to relax that and let it do what it's supposed to be doing, because of A, you're under threat in the local area of the spine, and B, the brain has been trained through all of its performance history to use the lumbar erectors or those big old back straps to stabilize the spine, even though that's extremely inefficient.
Gotcha. Yeah. So you just
And
have to do a prone
also,
press up better.
yep, 100%. Well, it's just you got to be better at cueing the prone press. Like that's when I tell people like, oh, like the back gets, or when people's back gets tight and they're like, oh, why is this? My number one thing is like, it's either on you and your head to use the actual like thought cues if you're doing it yourself, or on the coach or the therapist of you need to be better, whether it's kinesthetically putting your hands on and they're making sure, hey, I need you to relax this. I do that all the time with glutes. The number one fault I see when people do a prone press up is they squeeze their ass together like they're trying to do fucking prison defense.
Mm-hmm.
I'll literally just poke. I'm like, hey, that should not be on, and just keep tapping until they finally get it. And sometimes it takes 50 reps, but I need them to be competent at that because that's going to be their homework. Because again, or I haven't talked about it, but the only way this works is if we do a fuck ton of them. And by a fuck ton, I mean 10 sets of 10 to 15 sets of 10 a day. So 100 to 150 a day.
Nice. Dude, I'm gonna really latch onto something super unimportant that you said is thought cues. When I get the Neuralink, bro, that's exclusively how I'm gonna coach. Thought cues.
100%.
Thought cues.
Dude,
Just
have you
fucking
listened to
telepathy.
Rogan yet on
No, I did
with that
see
guy?
that. I did not. I saw it, but I haven't listened to it.
I never download podcasts like to actually like, hey, in case I lose signal, I downloaded that podcast. I haven't gotten to it yet, but I'm like, I can't lose this one. What if the government goes, they don't fucking like Elon right now? What if they try to take it off? This one's mine.
I think that one's gonna be a little bit underwhelming. Like I don't think he's gonna say, "Oh, I can read minds now," but maybe
No,
one day. I don't know.
but I want to hear about it. As the first test subject, I want to hear exactly what's going on because that's going to decide, am I throwing a computer chip in my brain?
Yeah.
The answer is probably yes for the people at home.
I am definitely not. That's why we work, because I'm fucking way on the other side of this thing.
You're telling me that I can increase from like 20% brain power to like 40, maybe? Sign me the fuck up.
All right. Well, good luck.
Let's go.
I want
But yeah,
nobody
so
else in my head.
for hamstrings, then the last thing for hamstrings would be like sliding the nerves. So you'll just go tension on one side of the system. So like straight knee, toe, dorsiflexed foot towards your face, and then looking at it. And then you'll just bend your knee, point your toe, and then look back. So it's just sliding from the spine or the top of the neck all the way down the chain. So the position would be you're laying on your back face up. Your one knee, the irritated hamstring, is bent. And then your toe is going to be pointed down to the ground in plantar flexion. When we're in that bent position, your head is up looking at your kneecap. Now, the second part of this slide is that we extend our knee, we pull our toes towards our nose in that dorsiflexed position, and then you're going to let your head relax down to the ground. What that's doing is it's sliding the nerve all the way up from the base of the spine, all the way down to the bottom of the foot on that side, back and forth to do one of two things. One, it gets rid of any sort of entrapments or adhesion points where it could be getting stuck. And then comparatively with that, then it's also going to bring oxygen to that area, which nerves really like oxygen, just like everything else in your body. So that increase in oxygenated sites as we do those sliders decreases irritation, which typically takes care of some of that hamstring tension.
Yeah. The next argument that I get from people too, and this is kind of our last thing on the hamstring, then we'll move on, but it's like the tightness serves a purpose, right? People want to say like the tight muscles like allow you to be more elastic or explode a little bit better. Which I mean, I don't completely disagree with, but when it gets to a point that it's dysfunctional, that's when we need to start to address it.
Bingo. It's tight muscles aren't a bad thing, right? Just like loose muscles aren't a bad thing. It's all how you use that system. It's when they start to get in the way of how you operate, however, that is a bad thing.
Yeah.
So if they start to become symptomatic, if they start to be getting too tight, if they start to cause irritation that lasts multiple days where you either A, can't practice, or B, it's impacting your day-to-day life, that's when it starts to become a bad thing because everybody's different. Like I'm a loosey-goosey individual. I don't have a lot of tension in my system. That's just how I'm made. So I can pick up if there's an increase in tension to a very small amount but as soon as I lose mobility, that's when my system starts to fall apart. If I lose it versus like you, for example.
Or no, even a better example of me is like a Dricus duplessis.
Right, exactly.
Wound like a motherfucker.
Yeah, like that dude's supposed to be tight. It's just when that tension starts to impact everything that's going on, when that tension starts to affect his grappling or his ability to A, do his job and B, do his sport, which in this case are the same thing, then that's a problem that we have to start addressing. because everybody has different base levels of tension. We just need to get you to where you operate the best.
Yeah. Cool. The next most common one that we get from a lot of our strikers constantly is elbow pain. My elbows fucking hurt from holding mitts. My elbows hurt from, chronically throwing punches, either overextending or getting like hyperflexed back. That was my issue when I was striking, is like people would hit my mitts all the time, and my hand would like crunch to my shoulder, and the elbow seems to get the raw end of that deal. So chronic elbow pain, right? What's going on? How do we address it? Like, I just give me some comfort about what's at my elbows aren't actually fucked up.
Well, they might be. No, it's chronic elbow pain. There's a few different things that can be going on. Like you talked about, the hyperflexion, hyperextension. That's the most common I've seen. Yeah. Whether you overextend on a punch and you just get stuck out in limbo and that just snaps it, and it causes like an elastic stretch on local ligamentous structures and or muscular structures. Or it could just be, again, like I'm very nerve based. That's what controls, that's the superhighway of information for our entire system. So the nerves control tension throughout the system in my model. So you could have ulnar nerve irritation, you could have median nerve irritation, you could have radial nerve irritation. All of those manifest as the front of the elbow, inside of the elbow, outside of the elbow, or back of the elbow, pain and or tension. So it could be a very similar thing to what I just talked about with the hamstrings, because guess what? The knees and the elbows are basically the same joint. Yeah. So of your system. So similar things are going to arise because of it, especially in combat sports, where if you think about like a punch at end range, that turns into a closed chain movement. Like throwing the punch is open chain, but connecting is a closed chain movement. Well, that makes sense. What's up?
The better you get, the more closed chain it becomes.
Right. If you whiff, it's open chain, but it starts as open chain, open chain, open chain. But as you distribute or push through and create that generation of force forward, or I guess not generation, but distribution of force forward through your opponent, that face of the opponent or body of the opponent make it closed chain. Yeah. Which is going to send a similar signal up the arm and to the elbow that if you take a step forward with your knee, okay, because they're both closed chain movements. So with this, we'll start with the nerve, because that's the easiest example from the hamstring. So we have three nerves that I talked about: radial, median, ulnar. It also could be neck stuff, because just like how the low back, it's susceptible to disc issues. Well, the neck has the same curve. They're both lordotic curves. And because of that, they're prone to a little bit more of an increase in disc irritation, which can cause pressure on the nerves. And guess what? The exact same thing applies if we have a disc issue and pressure on the nerves in the neck. It's going to send a signal down the chain. It's going to lock down everything it's associated with and cause an increase in tension, sometimes like electric pain, and then sometimes a burning sensation in that area. That's what you get with nerve pain. Mm-hmm. So if you have a burn, if you have electric, that has to be nerve. That's not going to be muscle. It's not going to be ligament. So we know it could be multiple things, because you're allowed to have more than one problem. That's another thing a lot of healthcare people don't tell you. They try to give you one diagnosis. Your elbow could be fucked up in more than one way. I hate to break it to you. And it's understanding what symptoms match what rehab or what therapy or what treatment you have to do.
100%. Like, yeah, and that's my immediate reaction is like, I don't know. It's always a dull ache for me. It's never like a sharp or a burn.
Right. So what I tell people, if the dull ache lasts for more than like 8-ish weeks, right, and you did what you could, you took some time off. Well, guess what? Ligaments typically heal 8 to 12 weeks. If you took your time off, if you did what you needed, if you tried to therapize it,
nobody ever takes time off, by the way.
Well, get smarter, people. But if you do what you're trying to do to get that joint better, and guess what? It's time to look at complicators, aka the nerve, because the ligament's going to heal itself in 12-ish weeks, as long as you don't add more threat on top. That's just how the body works. Yeah. And the further away from the heart, the longer it's going to take to heal those areas. But the elbow, we're looking at really 8 to 12 weeks for resolution of if it's a ligament or tendon issue. Okay. So with that, if it's lasting 24 weeks, that's no longer going to be that fucking lateral epicondylitis. Like that's not going to happen unless you're continuing to add stimulus on top. If you did what you did to try to take away the stimulus and it's still there, it's probably the nerve or it's probably your neck, and you need to go get that assessed. But if it is that dull ache and it's only been 3 weeks, That most definitely could be lateral epicondylitis. That or
Mm-hmm.
osis is probably the better diagnosis. That could be tricep tendinosis, which is another thing I want to talk about because a lot of elbow issues that I've found basically gets resolved with a few sessions of tricep pin and stretch. It's wild that because there's so many entrapment points through the tricep because the tricep
Gotcha.
gets used
Mm-hmm.
so much in MMA that if you decrease the tension through there, you can resolve a lot of symptoms.
Nice.
But neither here nor there. It could be that there's another diagnosis that a lot of people don't talk about. It's cauliflower elbow. You got bone chips in the elbow. You ever see somebody that they can't fully extend their elbow and it feels like there's a grinding sensation on the inside?
Yeah.
You might have bone chips on the inside of the elbow that could be limiting you from even getting to full extension.
And that's probably the most frustrating solution. Like that's where my mind's going right now. It's like, what do I do for all this stuff? Like what are some
For
ways
sure.
to address it?
So I would say first is, as always with everything, go get assessed by a professional, right? You don't know what you're working with until you figure out what you're actually dealing with.
I could just imagine somebody hammering through these tricep extensions we're about to talk about, and they like have bone chips in their elbow.
Yeah,
It's just
exactly. Like,
don't do that. Don't do
right.
that.
And at the end of the day, like for an MMA fighter, function is what matters. We want you to be as healthy as possible, but we know your job is traumatic. So you got to go make your next paycheck. If you got money on the line to go fight, it's about getting you to the fight or getting you to function as well as possible. It's not necessarily about the pathoanatomical, like what's the diagnosis. It's about how do I get you ready for what your body's about to do. But if for the most part, for 90% of the listeners that aren't in the UFC, it's about finding exactly what the source of this is, figuring out what our next step forward is to mitigate those symptoms, and then coming up with a consistent rehab plan and or training plan to move yourself towards the goals of getting better. If it's nerve, we're going to do a nerve assessment. We're going to figure out, is it one of the nerves or is it all of the nerves? Another possibility, which would most likely mean the disc. And then we're going to add in probably some sort of neck movement and some sort of slider, similar to what I talked about with the with the hamstrings. And that's going to be our first path forward.
Mm-hmm.
If it's going to be like tricep tendinitis or osis, well, we know that the tendon's not going to get stronger unless we get massively high reps. Like that's every piece of research done on tendons means we need a shitload of time under tension and we need a bunch of reps. So I'm probably going to throw you on a West Side protocol of not super light, but light-ish banded tricep extensions of 60 reps and up for a couple sets. And that's after we do our treatments. That's going to be how we strengthen the tendon to try to get rid of, A, pump more oxygen in the area, but B, get rid of that tendinosis for the long term so we can try to bulletproof that area. It also could be offloading the elbow joint. If it is that, like I've found a lot of success with DNS hand loading patterns and trying to distribute the force up and down the chain a little bit better. If it is that recurring inside of the elbow nagging pain, that dull ache you're talking about, I'll throw somebody into a low bear position. I'll manipulate the way their elbow is and I'll have them isometrically load that area and then increase progressions of, all right, we'll isometrically load in a low bear plank.
Yeah.
Then we'll go from that isometric loading in that position that we deemed was non-inflammatory or non-symptomatic. We'll progress then even forward more into, all right, we're going to lift up the other arm. So we're essentially trying to load that scapula, that shoulder blade in a beneficial way, but then also distribute force through the forearm at an increased rate. Okay, boom. Once we know how we can stabilize on one hand, then we're going to turn it into a locomotion pattern. Now we'll add low bear crawls in, but it'll be a time under tension low bear crawl where we're doing real slow, short, choppy steps as we go, and then making sure that we have proper shoulder, elbow, and hand position. Most likely the biggest issue is you're not pushing through your index finger. Everybody doing a push-up, if you watch anybody do push-ups that just does push-ups, they rock to the outside of their hands, their index finger lifts up, and that destabilizes the entire chain all the way up.
Yeah.
We need to drive that index finger down, make our hand as wide as possible. That distributes force to the anterior, the front, and the back of the elbow and decreases irritation on the inside of the elbow, which typically gets chewed up in this position. Very similar to like, you ever, like at home, the people at home, like you do a squat and the inside of your knee hurts. Well, what's most likely happening? Either you're not using your hip well enough or you're destabilizing the foot. The exact same thing happens with the elbow. It's just the inside of the elbow now.
Yeah.
So what happens in a push-up? You're either not using your hand well enough and stabilized, or you're not using your shoulder stability well enough. But a lot of people don't think about it like that because the elbow is a different joint than the foot or than the knee, even though they operate in a very similar paradigm.
Yeah, man. Like the push up is a good little microcosm of like our movement culture, right? Like our movement culture is pretty much off in general, but our push up culture is 100% off.
Trash. Absolutely trash.
I cannot stand how people use push ups. It's like push ups, you do them really well, are a hard fucking exercise. But instead of acknowledging that, we're just gonna be like, all right, 100 push ups, go.
Well, that's why I've almost exclusively moved towards hand release push-ups, and
Yeah.
I make them at the bottom of the movement. I make them pause for a second, and they get that index finger isolation, and then they can complete the push-up. Then we come back down. And so it's just retraining that good position over and over and over again to bring the brain awareness.
It's 100% way to slow it down, way to make people rethink that pattern.
But yeah, so that's what I would do for those elbow situations. The other thing, and we'll get into this next. That's the next topic, but it's solid intro.
So you've been foreshadowing very heavily for the neck and low back.
Oh, we've already talked about neck and low back. I'm going to popping of joints, homie.
Oh, all right. Oh, fuck. Okay,
we've almost talked the neck and low back. It's the same things already talked
nerves.
about.
Nerves.
It's just nerves. You need to. I don't want you forward folding. Nerves. I don't want you fucking stretching your neck all the time. You need to get into the opposite movement that you normally do. So for the neck, it's making a double chin over and over again. For the low back, it's doing extension over and over again. That's going to help you tremendously because as a combat athlete, you're using the opposite movement all of the time, and it's loaded with another human's body weight on top, which is relatively irritating to the body.
Yeah, in general.
So that's what I'll say about that, because it's all the same as what I just talked about for the elbow and the hamstring. But popping of joints, it does not fucking matter if it is painless. That is one of my biggest frustrations with people, is that they get hung up on, oh, my elbow clicks all the time. Oh, my knee clicks all the time. And they get so hung up on that audible sound that they think something's wrong with them.
Yeah, it's not smooth. It's not fluid. Everything's supposed to be flowy.
For sure. And I would love if it did, right? I would love if it was fluid as fuck, but we're not all perfect.
You're real athletes going through real trauma, going through shit. Like literally part of my morning routine is to jam my foot in the ground and twist my knee inward to make it pop for no reason, right? It doesn't help me. It doesn't hurt me, whatever, but it's just something I've latched onto. Right. So it's like, and that doesn't mean anything's wrong. It just means at some point in my life, I've accumulated trauma there and now I can pop it.
100%. And sometimes it's fibrocartilage. Sometimes it's just a gas bubble that pops. That's all like adjustments are. It's literally just a gas bubble getting released. And that's what the pop is. It's not, we're moving bones back in place. I hate to break it to the straight chiros out there, but the bones aren't out of place. They're just not moving. All an adjustment does is you just make it move more, and it takes away some pain, because that high velocity, low amplitude adjustment blocks the pain gate on both sides of the essentially neurons, if you will.
Yeah, that's another, I think, reframing that's really good for society in general is like, we're not, and I say we, I mean you, are not like putting things back in the right alignment or place. It's like, we're just getting shit to move. Like movement and like motion is lotion. Movement's your ultimate thing. The adjustments just help you move minutely where you literally have no control or you can't, right?
And like everybody, one big thing, a lot of people like, well, then why don't I just like pop my own neck or something like that? And the difference is when you pop your own. So again, let's go for a step further back. What's the number one goal of the brain? Well, it's never going to hurt itself. It's never going to give what would be perceived to it as a resistance or a negative input that could potentially be harmful, right? So if you're, say, popping your own neck over and over and over again, most likely what you're doing is you're popping over and over again the same vertebra because it feels a little tight, but those vertebrae are probably moving too much. They're probably hyper movers. So most of them, if you're thinking about the neck, it's the middle part of your cervical spine. Whereas if you go to a trained professional, it doesn't have to be a chiro. Chiros, PTs, ATs, I believe those DOs, I believe those are the four with scope to adjust. What we're doing is we're finding what segments aren't moving And we're trying to put a stimulus in there to make them move, because your body most likely can't develop enough force in those areas to do it itself.
Yeah, and then better yet, along the chain, or like try and teach you and help you be able to move those in the future at some point, right? Like, I mean,
Well, that's the thing. We make them move with a manual therapy, aka an adjustment. And it doesn't have to be an adjustment. It could be an adjustment. It could be we
an
need to release the
exercise.
soft tissue.
Yeah.
It could be, and we do dry needling, cupping,
Yeah.
whatever. Sometimes it's just the muscles are super tight, and that's what's limiting that spinal movement. But for the most part, all we're doing with our manual therapies, anything I just talked about, is trying to get you to the point where we can then teach your brain how to move it on its own.
Mm-hmm.
That's how I use my adjust. Like I was president of MPI out in Oregon when I was in school. I taught people how to adjust my entire career at school, other students as I went along. It's something I love doing. It's a powerful tool, but at the end of the day, it's just a tool. It's not a fix.
Yeah.
It's what allows me to get to my end game, which is getting you as the patient to then move that joint in that plane of motion as effectively as possible to increase that brain connection with the area so that you can control it. Like a really funny, it's a test that one of my mentors, Corey Campbell, always does is he'll grab his reflex hammer and there's something called graphesthesia, where on the skin, if you have a joint blockage, so say in your middle thoracic spine or that mid back, if you can't move your mid back, if somebody chronically that has a super tight mid back, you don't understand, you can't do 2-point discrimination really well, which means you can't pick up on like small, minute changes in the area neurologically.
Mm-hmm.
So what he'll do is he'll draw in the like a 2-inch little circle, he'll draw a letter. And it's really funny. He always picks the person with the biggest kyphosis or that like buffalo back.
Yeah.
And he'll like draw on their back. And almost exclusively, they will get the number wrong.
Yeah.
They'll be like, he'll draw a 3 and they say it's a 4 or something like that. Like they're not even close. Like my favorite one is when he draws a 3 and they say 7. I'm like, that's not even fucking close. That's not even the same lines. But, and I've seen it probably 15 times now because I've helped with a bunch of his seminars. And then we go manipulate that joint. We try to bring in neurologic input so that he can understand where the movement is. Yeah. He'll do the exact same test right after, same tension, same everything. And boom, that 3 is now a 3 in his brain because he has the awareness. He has the increase in proprioception in that area to be able to understand the input that's going through the system and sent up to the brain.
Well, and then the key there is to like chronically try and be in that state, right? Like how do you maintain that movement? Because we just go back to our everyday lives and don't really change our patterns. We're going to be right back in that like unaware position, in the next hour, next day, next whatever. Right. And so like, that's the game we play. And this is like how I conceptualize it, which is a little bit funky, I know, but like, I think of like a monk or somebody that's like super self-aware. Like they can think about every joint in their system, every like muscle tension and fiber, and they like have the ability to move and manipulate it. I want to move closer to that type of like mythical or ideologic type of character, right? And a lot of times I can't do it by myself, which is like the hardest thing.
You just want to be a mythical character, though.
Oh,
that's been a goal of yours since I met you. You just want to be in a video game,
dude. Why not? But it's like I have a lot of hard times doing it myself. That's the thing that I think a lot of us realize is like, I know my mid back is tight. I have a really hard time moving it. Mm-hmm. And me just continually thinking and trying to move it probably won't get the job done. But I go get a little bit of help or adjusted or given an exercise or two. This is how a gateway into moving your lower back or your mid back, excuse me. Then I can do.
It's an adjustment anywhere, dude. Yeah.
Right. And then I can have a little bit more awareness. And now I can start to actually build upon and work on that. Right. That's where we need the help, quote unquote, popping the joints is not to get like aligned and refreshed. And all right, now I can go fuck it up again. It's to get movement happening. Now we can be a little bit more aware of that movement. And now I can build better patterns around that awareness, which is
100%.
The right way to think about it versus the kind of skewed way to think about it.
Right. Like, and I don't want this to come off as everybody needs to go get adjusted because that's just not true. Right. It's as a chiropractor, I'm fine saying it. I don't think everybody needs to get adjusted. I think that's overkill. Yeah. But it is a great kickstart into understanding how to move that joint. And as long as you pair that passive modality of an adjustment with our active modalities of rehab in that area, neurologic feedback, doing whether it's DNS where you're uprighting the spine or FRC where we're trying to hit rotation all the way through, whatever or any exercise really. Like an overhead press is a really good one I use to increase thoracic extension after an adjustment. I'll do a mid back adjustment. I'll do it outside in the tables in the gym, and then I'll have them just do a straight up seated Z press and try to get them into thoracic extension as they go.
Yeah.
And we'll test it before, we'll test it after, so their brain recognizes the difference and, oh, this is what a properly moving thoracic spine is. That's a great way to kind of the next topic we're going to go into is shoulders. It's a great way to show them that they're overusing the shoulders and underusing their spine when it comes to any sort of shoulder overhead movement.
Yeah. And that's a huge realization too, is like whatever you, and it's a weird way to think about it, whatever you're good at, right? You probably default to and move all the time there, right? Like your body loves to go back to these like well-known patterns, right? Like, and a lot of times the well-known or the strong patterns are the dysfunction that gets you into trouble, right?
Right.
And before we move on shoulders, just have one more thing to say. I picked up on another inconsequential thing you said. You said, I'm sorry about all the straight chiros out there. And I think that posits the existence of a queer chiros. And I like that. That's a fun thought for me. But
no, so all right, I'll explain it for everybody. So in chiro, it's not as much as it used to be because just the way that our profession is moved towards, like a lot of people at home don't realize what goes into being a chiro. A lot of people, you hear Joe Rogan say we're fake doctors and all the fun shit. Like my education, actually, we had the same basic sciences as OHSU, which is the number one PCP medical medical doctor education in the country. So the same as that. And then we move from that into our diagnostics and then into our adjusting and rehab and all the different things. We're trained as PCPs essentially so that we can pick up on any red flags and know when to refer. But there are certain schools that I picked my school because they taught us to be a doctor, not just an adjuster.
Yeah.
There's certain schools that teach you how to be really good doctors first, and then you learn the treatment along the lines, right? Which I believe is the number one goal of a formal education, is to get all the red flags. And then once you understand how to basically assess as many people as possible, as many crazy conditions as possible, and to be as efficient as possible, you will figure out with your experience what's the best way to treat every one of those, right? It's way more important to be, in my mind, a good assessor than it is to be a good treater out the gate, because you never want to fuck up an assessment. You always want to get to the root of the problem as best as you possibly can, because that's how you truly help the person in front of you. You need to be as almost like I don't want to be a shotgun. I want to be a sniper. That's that's what I think about. My school trains you to be a sniper.
Yeah.
But
I mean, I think there's a good parallel with every problem in general that way, right? Like I think athletes get in this tunnel of vision. It's like, I have a really good hook, right? It's not just throwing the hook 1,000 times and hopefully it lands. It's like, all right, let's figure out how we can game plan and use tactics against my opponent so that the hook will happen, right? So it's like, be a good strategist, or like be able to see the whole picture and then be able to use your tools versus just having the tools, which again is like a fallacy that happens in a lot of professions, is because just being good at using the tools will get you pretty far, right? It'll help you pretty much to get to the show, right? Like you said, but your whole mantra, like getting good to great, is like, you're not going to be great just being good at using the tools.
100%. Like I need to know, like say somebody comes into me and they're having like paresthesia of their balls or something like that, like weird symptom, right? But it's been going on for a long time. They start to have some sort of irritation all the way through the area. A straight chiro would be like, or a chiro that went to a school that focuses more on treatment
above balls with a straight chiro. I like that.
Oh yeah. See what I did there? Yeah. Pulled it back. But so say with if you went to a school that doesn't prioritize the diagnostic side, they prioritize the adjustment philosophy side of things, they'll probably start to adjust that patient. Versus like for me, I know, okay, I got to dive a little bit deeper. What is it just a standard disc issue? Or could we possibly be dealing with like cauda equina syndrome, which is it's a shitty situation. That's an emergent referral, which means I need to send them right to the ER. If I don't know how to pick up on those two situations, I don't know how to help that person in front of me. I can teach a monkey how to adjust somebody, dude. It's not fucking hard. It just takes a lot of experience and a lot of training your hands to do it. Now, that monkey's not going to be as good as somebody that's extremely trained, right? But you can do it still. I can't teach a monkey how to figure out how to distinguish between cauda equina and a disc herniation. I can't teach a monkey the steps for figuring out, is that calf pain or is that a fucking DVT? That's what you need to know as a physician, which I consider myself. That's what I'm trained to be. And a lot of people don't realize that when you're going to a chiro, and that's the difference between philosophy-based schools and science-based schools. So philosophy-based schools are straight chiros. Science-based schools they're traditionally called mixer schools. And that's because we mix all the therapies.
Gotcha. Interesting. Shoulders and AC joints.
That was the worst segue I think we've ever done.
I was
fucking looked up to the sky. You're like, oh, what are we talking about next?
I was debating whether to go down a different rabbit hole or to stick to our agenda on this schedule. But so shoulders and AC joints.
Yeah, shoulders and AC joints. So a lot of the times I sound like a fucking broken record. It's you got to be able to assess the spine and figure out, is it the spine that's causing the shoulder pain? A lot of times it is. We know hip and shoulder pain are the two most common places where we get that EXPOSS, or extremity pain of a spinal source. That being said, the shoulder actually, in my experience, is one of the places that it is way more important to be really good at assessing every part of the shoulder joint and figuring out what tissue is irritated than just going after the neck first. Like for knees and like hamstring pain, I'm batting a pretty high batting average that it's the back. For like say AC pain or something like that, I need to be really good at assessing the local tissue, and maybe the nerve might be a little bit of an irritant. It might be a little bit of a complicator, but the majority of the symptoms that patient's feeling, or the majority of what's going on, comes from the local tissue and the local irritation of, say, that wrestler landed on their shoulder. They got a double leg takedown, and instead of landing with a tucked roll, you land directly on the AC joint. Well, that's a recipe for an AC separation or sprain. So, and without going too far into ACs, because it's not as common as people think, but it is a common thing in combat sports. AC joint, one of the only ways to irritate that is direct trauma. Yeah. So most AC separations and sprains come from you literally landing directly on that joint, and that's what causes the irritation.
Yeah, AC joints are frustrating because it's like, time and or surgery are like your only two fixes.
100%. Yeah, and most surgeries, so there's new research coming out that is a little bit contradictory to this, but the way I treat AC joints is I'm not even going to let my well, I guess they can do whatever they want, but I'm not going to recommend my athlete get surgery for the most part, because a lot of AC surgeries are just cosmetic in nature. Really? Like that big old, think about Nate Diaz's shoulders. It's Nate.
I have a little raise in mine
step off defect, right? Yeah. And that step off defect is more cosmetic than anything. Yes, it's going to change the way the shoulder biomechanics operate at a small degree, but for the most part, a lot of it comes from the active tension relationship of the muscles in the area, and you can regain a lot of that function relatively quickly. Gotcha. So, but for the most part, it's if you think it looks ugly as shit and you're going to go be a model, get that shit fixed. But if you're just doing it to fight, and the way your fight style already landed on your shoulder and caused that AC separation, well, there's a high likelihood it's going to fucking happen again. So why would you go get a cosmetic surgery when in reality we could just train the active or the muscular system around it to help stabilize that joint as best it can?
Yeah. I think my next career choice should be model. So I need to get surgery on my shoulder.
We can agree to disagree, Alex.
I need to get shoulder surgery. I need to get nose surgery. I need to get complete facial reconstruction.
Maybe back when you had that luscious flow, but I don't know about the whole military cut. I don't know if that flies with models.
Oh, so you're just saying I'm ugly, huh?
Well,
sorry. You and my wife agree, so.
No, well, we're going to skirt away from that one. No, and then I guess another thing to talk about with the shoulder is rotator cuff stuff. So it's a lot of people, they feel a pop, catch, click in the shoulder. If it's painless, we just talked about that. Who fucking cares? But if you do feel like a painful pinch when we're lifting our arm up overhead, or doing it, a lot of the times it's when you turn over a punch In MMA,
Mm-hmm.
that's when you start to feel it. That could just be from you have a narrowing of that. So your rotator cuff goes through a canal right through the scap, and that attaches to the front of our arm bone or humerus,
Mm-hmm.
right? Sometimes when you turn that over and there's not enough space, say you're starting from an elevated space, or if you have some AC irritation, that's going to cause a pinch through that tendon of the rotator cuff. That tendon of the rotator cuff is then going to cause that pinching pain as you turn over your punch, because as you go through that, that closes off that canal that that tendon goes through. A good way to look at this is we want to train the posterior or the back muscles a little bit better. Typically, rocking some face pulls reps this out really quick, but we're
Mm-hmm.
high volume. So if you are like, again, no medical information, but if we're training for this, we'll say, like banded face pulls 3x30 typically puts it's all about that tension relationship. It
Yeah.
takes the tension off the anterior or the front, puts it on the posterior or the back. And with that tension on the posterior, it allows our shoulder blade to drop just a little bit as we go through. So it increases our functional centration, which we've talked about in the past, which is as
Mm-hmm.
much surface area as possible for my shoulder blade on my rib cage. And that typically takes care of the problem over the course of a month ish.
Yeah, and I think that's a good practical way to approach it versus like I have a lot of athletes that like, get upset about like not even like I have pain when I turn over the punch in my shoulder. It's like I have no overhead mobility, and it's like, do you fucking need it? Right? Like I get a lot of people that like focus on the wrong side of that problem of like I need to increase my overhead. It's like how much overhead mobility do you really need? Or like do you need to be able to press a barbell perfectly overhead? Like nah, we're gonna chill on that. Um, and then the second place that I was thinking about when you were talking about the face pulls is a lot of people replace a good face pull with just like, shoulder elevation and shrugging of the
Yeah,
traps. It's like,
fucking terrible.
that's not what we're doing, right? We're constantly like the cue I use is like trying to touch the bottom of these shoulder blades together, right? It's like, let's work a little bit, again, into that place of discomfort. It's like, I know we can just rip out these face pulls and like, but we're not solving any of the issues. We're just repetitively getting into that problematic pattern.
Well,
So,
and so that's a good segue for so the cue's not bad, right? But we also
mm-hmm,
want the shoulder blade to increase centration, right? We want them
mm-hmm,
to the biggest thing for increasing shoulder function is the shoulder blade on the rib cage, and then get the shoulder blade to glide across the rib cage.
yeah,
So touching them is fine, but they have to be able to control the thoracic spine and keep that turtle shell, if you will, as
yeah,
they're coming together. So many people, as they do a face pull, they just move their sternum forward and they just
yeah,
arch their back. And that actually does the opposite of what we're looking for.
yeah.
That's not even going to fire the muscles we're looking for, and it makes it a little bit more inefficient instead of efficient.
Yeah, like one way I think about it, I see this in push-ups again. Fuck
Yeah,
push-ups. I see
100%.
push-ups
Yeah.
all the time. It's like when there's space between your like shoulder blade, or there's like a skin curtain between your shoulder blade and your spine. Like, that's a problem. This is not great functional movement, right? And so it's like, again, the centration is just like gliding is a really good word for that scapula, just to like kind of hover and move with the rib cage versus like separate from it or like create gaps. Like one thing when we were at the level 1 DNS that I've like latched on to this day is like whenever you see divots or gaps in the human body, like that's a good indication of weakness or dysfunction.
100%. Like those little like back dimples. You
Mm-hmm.
ever see somebody that's got like super tight erectors and then got back dimples on both sides?
Mm-hmm.
Guess what? That's not good. That means you're not breathing into that area. I could almost promise you you're
Yeah.
not stabilizing correctly. And because you're not stabilizing correctly, you're overusing the posterior muscles. Overusing those low back posterior muscles causes irritation, that tension that you feel. And then it sends that signal down to the hamstrings to bring it full circle. That
Yeah.
tightens those guys up.
Yeah, and like where I got called out on this is like the kind of the oblique area, like right on
Mm-hmm.
under my rib cage, right? It's like, okay, you're doing everything right sagittally, but we're not working in like a transverse or kind of a frontal plane with your breath in that way. And like a really good, I don't know, this is kind of a tangent off of the shoulder, but a
You're good. We're
good,
done with shoulder. Talk
yeah,
your shit.
a good way to look at it is like I see this in the CrossFit games all the time,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
Like you see a ton of like tightness and dimples, but those people are so good at like breathing, expanding anteriorly that they're like, six packs look more like barrels and look more like, just like, I guess, inflated balloons, if you will. And it's like, okay, they're really good at breathing anteriorly, and that shit looks functional, but then you turn around to the kind of the back half and it's like, oh boy, there's a lot of arching going on.
For sure. Which, if you're a CrossFit Games athlete and you're doing it for performance, for example, to bring it full circle, I'm not necessarily going to change how you're operating if you just won the CrossFit Games.
Yeah,
right. But if you start to have pain, we might look to add some breathing in everything. But if that's your strategy for winning and you're the best in the world, that's like telling Michael Jordan he's got to jump different.
Yeah.
Like, I'll tell it to him if he's starting to have a fuck ton of knee pain, but I'm not going to tell it to him when he's going for that dunk off the goddamn free throw line.
Well, and you might not even tell him to jump different. You might just like treat the symptoms until he retires, or like figure out a way to perform in spite of versus change everything, right? Like it's again, priorities difference between like living healthily and pain avoidance versus like performance.
Yep, 100%. But if for the vast majority of the people at home that are not in the UFC or in the CrossFit Games,
I could still be Michael Jordan if I wanted.
Oh, shut the fuck up.
If I really dedicated myself to training, I'd be in the UFC in like 2 years. No, not even like 6 months, you know?
Exactly. Yeah. You'd fly past the amateur circuit.
I have a wrestling background. The amateur circuit's easy, bro. I can do that.
All right, Bo Nickel.
That's all sarcasm, just so you guys know.
Yeah. But if you're the vast majority of people, it matters more that we actually try to fix those symptoms, because we're not trying to operate at a massively high level to go get paid to do this.
Right.
We're trying to do this for longevity and trying to make your body feel as good as possible so that you can operate as long as possible. Yep. Professional athletes we're here for a short time, or a good time, not a long time. Yep. Longevity athletes or recreational athletes, that we're here for a long time and we're going to make it as good as possible. And that's how we need to train. That needs to be the priority with which we're operating.
Love it, man. Boom. Love it. Roasted. I think we've addressed a lot of bodily problems with.
Yeah, I hope you guys like listening to me, because that was a fuck ton of talking.
It was good information, right? It's like healthcare information and nervous system shit that I vaguely know, but I don't specialize in, you know?
Yeah. Well, if you guys have any questions on any of this, I'm always happy to answer. It's one of my favorite things to talk about because it's what I do all day. So hit us up at Building a Fighter on Instagram, and I'll be happy to talk about more different irritating conditions. I can never give health advice online, but I can always give information about the issues.
The best way to goad Austin to a response is like a super toxic comment. Like, please 100%. Leave that on some of our miscellaneous videos. Not even one that he's like talking, but like, let's leave really toxic comments on some of our exercise demos. I know that's going to get you a response.
It might, but I don't look at the Instagram a whole bunch because your boy Sid, which happy 30th birthday, Sid. Today is your birthday.
Oh, yeah.
But Sid's controlling most of the Instagram, so your boy don't even look at it much anymore. Comment whatever the fuck you want. But if there is any messages that are directed towards me, I always get updated and I'll always answer those. But if you got to get in touch with us, information is going to be in the show notes, both the Instagram and the email. If you're looking for any programs or if you're looking for any sort of mobility training, anything at all, that's going to be at buildingafighter.com. We have a new like a contact form, or not contact form, like essentially it's a quiz to figure out what program's right for you. So we've put the thing together to where if you go through the whole quiz, it will spit out, say you're looking to be a wrestler. Boom, that's right to the wrestler grind based off the information you have, the equipment you have, and then the days of the week that you need to operate. So all of that's available at buildingfighter.com. We got customs, presets, and membership options for our strength and conditioning routines. And as always, it's Dr. Austin Shane.
Alex Friedman.
And we are out.